March 5th, 1953. The Soviet Union mourns the death of Premier Joseph Stalin. Stalin had presided over its rise as one of the world's supreme industrial, political, and military powers.
His people regarded as a god this man who was born the son of a shoemaker, for above all, he became a star to guide them to a more prosperous way of life. In return, they gave him their undying devotion and accepted his every word as law. But one thing Stalin did not give them, their freedom. And that, to countries outside the Iron Curtain, means all.
As a young man in the Russian colony of Georgia, Stalin had studied for the priesthood, but was lured away by socialism. Stalin's destiny was sealed when he met Vladimir Lenin in 1905. He became involved in the Bolshevik movement and in the October Revolution that gave birth to the Soviet Union. While his contemporaries despised the mundane drudgery of committees and party machinery, Stalin thrived on it and used it to his advantage. Soon, he had seized control of the party, and despite a rift with Lenin, Stalin was poised to succeed him. After Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin dismantled his predecessor's liberal economic policies and established a police state. To increase agricultural and industrial production, he introduced the first 5-year plan. Stalin began by confiscating farmland, crops, and livestock in the name of the state. He then forced more than 25 million people onto state-run farms called collectives. Those who resisted were sent to prison camps in Siberia. Many more were executed. The results were tragic. Agricultural production plummeted, and at least 15 million people starved to death during collectivization. Stalin pressed on with industrialization and built factories across the Soviet Union. Soviet production surged, and by 1937, it was second only to the United States. Reacting to criticism over the failures of collectivization, Stalin launched the Great Terror in 1934, a bloody purge of the party and military. In elaborate show trials, the accused were declared counter-revolutionaries, coerced into confessing imaginary crimes, and put to death. Stalin also used propaganda and a cult of personality to seduce and control the Soviet people. He replaced organized religion with the worship of communist heroes, including himself and Lenin. In paintings and photographs, Stalin was depicted as a benevolent great leader, vigilantly watching over his people. As reassuring as these images were, the Soviet people's faith in Stalin's leadership would soon be tested by Adolf Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union in World War II. Millions perished as the German army ravaged the Soviet Union, leaving only devastation in its wake. But the Soviet people rallied, and the Red Army eventually drove the invaders back to Berlin. At conferences in Tehran and Yalta, Stalin met twice with British Prime Minister Churchill and American President Roosevelt. The Big Three discussed and planned post-war Europe. Stalin promised fair and democratic elections in Soviet-occupied Eastern Europe. But these elections never took place, and relations with the West deteriorated. In 1949, the Soviet Union revealed its nuclear capability. Stalin's crowning achievement signaled to the world that the USSR had indeed arrived as a superpower. The Cold War was on. On March 2nd, 1953, Stalin suffered a brain hemorrhage and succumbed 3 days later. The years after Stalin's death saw a marked decline in the extreme brutality that defined his regime. In 1956, Nikita Khrushchev shattered the myth of Stalin when he denounced the former leader and his crimes before the 20th Party Congress. Stalin cast a long shadow over future leaders of the Soviet Empire. He created a superpower, but had also planted the seeds of its destruction. Though today's Russia wrestles with a host of problems inherited from the Soviet era, many Russians long for the stability and order provided under Soviet rule. As it struggles in its experiment with democracy, Russia is haunted by the ghost of its ruthless and enigmatic leader.